Hello from snowy Vienna. I've got my European winter wear on, thank you to my daughter who lets me borrow her fun fashion choices. And this felt like the perfect morning to walk through the forest and update you. Although I'm going to be walking kind of slow and awkwardly, so we'll see how this goes and I might slip. I wanted to update everyone because my polygamy series is just going at a snail's pace. I started it in April 2023 and I was making a couple episodes a month, but since our family moved to Austria, my production has slowed way down, and mainly I blame it on the challenges of living abroad because that has dramatically changed my life. But also a huge factor this year has been my paper for the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. This paper has been such a roller coaster. It was based on my video where I present the narrative that to me is the best explanation for how polygamy came into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, if having more than one wife is an abomination, which I believe it is. So after I polished up the transcript of the video and I added all the footnotes, including a couple of corrections, which I've noted in the footnotes, I tried to turn it into a paper that could be peer-reviewed and published in the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. And I did present this at the first Journal of Mormon Polygamy conference last March because the peer review was well underway by then. But to be published in this journal, and this is standard, the paper needed to be under 50,000 words. And even though 50,000 is actually really long, and even better if it's less than, like a lot less than that, but what I started with was significantly over that. And also, importantly, to pass peer review, you need to reasonably address the body of research that already exists, and of course, address the counter evidence. And that wasn't really part of my original paper, or the video actually, because I had just followed the pattern of the Gospel Topics essays on polygamy, where I took the historical sources and scriptures that supported what I consider to be the best explanation for polygamy's beginnings in the church, and I wove them into a narrative. So I have spent just an incredible amount of time trying to get this paper into the parameters to pass peer review, and after, a year? It's not going to work for the large narrative. So I narrowed my Journal of Mormon Polygamy paper down to just focusing on the historical documents of the church in the early 1830s. We're talking 1833 and earlier. And my thesis is that Joseph Smith's scriptures and teachings and other historical documents demonstrate that there's not enough evidence that Joseph began to consider polygamy as a salvific practice, right, as something necessary for salvation while translating the Bible, as the conventional narrative goes. And that this claim appears to be a later story crafted to explain anomalies in the Latter-day Saint polygamy narrative. So I agree with the change that the church made to the introduction of Section 132 recently, the statement that Joseph began to positively consider principles of polygamy as early as 1831 is just not factual, historically speaking. And that paper is rolling. Hopefully it will be published before the conference in March. And I did not think that I would be able to make it to the conference this year because time and money, like if we still lived in LA, yes, but we don't. And it was a lot to go back this summer. But with all that's been going on in this space, my husband was like, you have to go. And so I'm going. So I'm going to be at the Journal of Mormon Polygamy Conference in Utah on March 20th and 21st to present on this narrowed thesis. And I'm very excited. I was so nourished by meeting so many of you last year at the conference. And then last summer, at the very last minute, we were driving through Idaho from one family reunion to another, and I said, hey, anybody want to meet up? And we had just such a great time meeting together. And then a week later, same thing in Utah. I loved it. Meeting and talking with you about this is truly one of my favorite things in the whole world. To me, this is such good news. So it's no secret that the reason I'm doing this video series and writing is because I'm spiritually motivated by my faith that God's design for women has never been polygamy, and that we can see now that it's a tear. Polygamy is not wheat, it's a tear. I've learned through personal experience that planting that seed of faith in God's holy order of matrimony will yield good fruit and will allow us Latter-day Saints to shed many of our false traditions that have kept us from receiving the promises of the restoration. I don't think that I know more than prophets, seers, and revelators. I don't even know the leaders of our church. I just know that they keep reiterating the importance of women's influence. They keep reminding the Latter-day Saints that women's perspective is unique and needed, that women have moral authority when we follow the Holy Spirit and our intuition, which is to do good and be good. And I think with that in mind, that it's perfectly reasonable and scriptural to believe that women can offer wisdom to men in high callings without believing that we're better or wiser than them, especially if the men in leadership ask. And President Nelson, when he was the president and prophet of the church, he didn't just ask, he issued a plea to his sisters. Please speak up if you see deception. Please speak up as guardians of virtue. So if I have something to say from my perspective as a woman who loves Jesus Christ, then speaking up is how I sustain my leaders. I'm sharing my perspective, and I hope that people will consider it. And I actually fast and pray that people will consider another perspective of polygamy. A lot of us do. If I need to conform to academic standards to communicate a portion of my faith and make it easier for others to understand how polygamy can possibly be a tear if Section 132 is part of our scriptural canon, or if so many women testified that it was of God, or whatever reason people have for not being willing to consider that perspective, then I'm happy to do my best to package it to fit the parameters that will help people to listen and consider. If you're locked in, as my children say, if you hope to someday be a polygamist, or if you are a polygamist, I'm not expecting you to change because of what I say. I think you should know the negative outcomes that statistically accompany polygamy once children are in the picture, so you can make your choices based on good data. And maybe if you're already in a polygamous relationship with children, there are things that you can do to mitigate the negative outcomes. But I'm making this series for my fellow members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So if you do not hope to be a polygamist, then you don't have faith in it. Using the language of Section 132, if you do not desire to have many wives and concubines, or desire to be one of many wives and concubines, then you do not have faith in the principle and doctrine of men having many wives and concubines. You don't love it, you don't embrace it as part of the doctrine of Jesus Christ. I think that's good. And I encourage anyone conflicted about polygamy to align their faith with their actual hope, to plant that seed and see what sprouts. It's delicious. If you then have questions about the historical narrative, then look at the history and be open to other interpretations, because now we lay people can see the documents that we've never had access to before. And actually, it's not just the lay people. Now scholars too can have access to documents that were really not accessible until the last 10 years or so. And when you look at the documents, to me, I think it becomes a little bit easier to discern whose narrative is supported by those documents and whose narrative was formed maybe out of a perceived necessity. Over the last few months, I've been unsure how or if I should address the aggressive campaign that has been waged against people like me who believe that the fruits of polygamy demonstrate that it's not of God, and because of that, question and look more critically at the conventional historical narrative of polygamy in the church. There's a lot that's disheartening about it, and it's also kind of wild. Just as an example, this Christmas season, Vienna is one of the cities that has a giving machine. And the church has allocated a lot of resources and spent a lot of money to have a concurrent campaign running that promotes the Christmas story and our church as a place of Christmas worship. I'm talking digital ads on all the public transportation and static ads on many of the transportation stops with the address and meeting time of the church. And so the church is making a big effort to say, we're Christian. And at the same time, this Christmas campaign is happening. There's this pro-polygamy campaign going on online. It's been definitely going on for a while now, and it's had so much attention. But now it's shifted to calling people who don't agree with polygamy apostates. And I think despite the money and time that the church is spending pointing to Christ, we've got this whole side thing where people keep justifying polygamy. And it leaks through and it stains the entire effort. One of my fellow ward members recently told me about something that happened when someone found out that this person was a member. The other person made a joke about Mormon men having 10 wives. That's out of section 132. The more we defend polygamy and the more time we spend promoting it, the less people focus on Jesus Christ, despite our best efforts to point to Christ. I think that's because polygamy doesn't come from Christ. But maybe the strangest thing for me is that people who promote or defend polygamy as a doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because of the historical narrative that we have, a narrative that should not be able to pass peer review because it almost completely bypasses the historical records of the time. You guys claim to hate polygamy, or at least not want to participate in it yourselves. You say that it can't be comprehended and acknowledge that it's not just, but you're still promoting it as godly. And I just think it's so strange that there's no hope that we can knock and the truth will be opened unto us and that we can seek for understanding and find. This attitude that we can't know and can't understand, to me, is quite faithless. And it's disappointing that it has so much sway. When I heard about Karen Hyatt's excommunication, my family and I were in Prague, which is where my daughter got this hat, in the Czech Republic, to see our friend's concert. And shout out to Duo Atlantis. If they come to your town, definitely go see them. Rachel Payne is a mezzo-soprano and Jack Tyndale Bisco is a pianist, and they're both so talented and their concerts are absolutely delightful. And Jack is actually a descendant of William Tyndale, who was one of the Protestant reformers who translated much of the Bible into English in defiance of the law, and he was convicted of heresy and executed. And with that kind of in the front of my mind, I watched Karen's video while we were in Prague, and I didn't know she'd been excommunicated. And when she said it, I was just floored. It's a very serious thing to do to someone who keeps the commandments of Jesus Christ. The next day, my family and I went to Charles Bridge. I think of it as Martyr's Bridge because it's lined with statues of Catholic saints and patron saints, and some of the statues depict martyrdom. And I was so struck by the monuments, how these monuments of sacrifice for the sake of truth have been enshrined in stone. And I just kept thinking about how these people were once living flesh and blood with flaws and shortcomings and reasons that they should be ignored by those in power. But they chose to speak and align with the truth as they understood it. Obviously, as a heretic to the Catholic Church, William Tyndale was not on that bridge. But I thought about him too, how he shared something important with people who had been prevented from learning about it. Tyndale gave information to people that had previously been withheld from them. And for that, he was cast out and ultimately killed. With historical hindsight, it seems like it's really easy to discern what's good from what's bad. But when it's in our time, with regular people who are not in institutional hierarchy or who are not accredited historians or whatever credentials we believe people should have to be able to speak truth, we really seem to be blinded to what's happening. And I want to tell you about a couple experiences that I've had, because I've come to think that perhaps sharing things like this with each other can be helpful. I try to make time to connect with God every day. And I found that making time to be alone and pray and study scripture really opens my mind and heart to the divine source of love. Sometimes I can feel that God's trying to speak to me or wants my attention. So a few months ago, as I was seeing all these pro-polygamy videos come up, I felt like I needed understanding from God. And I felt I could feel God calling to me. I didn't know if I was supposed to speak up more or what to say and how. So when I was alone one morning, my husband was at work, my children were all at school. I went into my bedroom to prayerfully meditate. I have a scene that I go to in my mind when I want to meditate. The one that works for me is I'm in nature. It's not snowing, but I'm in a natural setting. It's quiet. And there's a natural ladder of branches along a rock wall. And I climb up that ladder, and I end up on a large, long slab of black granite that's covered in dust and dirt. And I pick up a broom, and I just sort of slowly sweep back and forth. That's kind of my go-to. But this day, as I prayed for God's Spirit to be with me, I felt like I should picture something else. So this is what I pictured as I felt directed by the Spirit. So it was my own mind thinking about these things in a prayerful state. So rather than my usual natural setting of meditation, I found myself standing on a dry dirt road at the edge of a town that looked just like what you'd imagine the towns looked like in Jesus's day. And it was a warm, sunny day, and as I stood looking at the long road in front of me, I became aware that Jesus was standing right next to me. And I was surprised, like, what are you doing here? And he just said, walk with me. And I was like, okay. And I noticed that, I became aware that he was carrying a lot of construction materials. And so I offered to help him carry those. And he, handed off half of them, I don't know. He just handed off some of them to me, and they were so heavy and super awkward to carry. And I was like, ooh, this is harder than I thought it would be. And we start walking together, and almost immediately, like, some small children come running out, and I practically trip over them. And it was funny because even in my meditative imagination, I'm like tripping on children. But, I could feel that Jesus and I were both like smiling about this, because we know that children are lovable and exasperating, and it's fine for them to run. Like, it's totally fine. But of course, that also means that they're going to get in your way. So we kept walking, and the whole town just felt like one long street. And on both sides of the street, people were just doing their thing. And a few times I wondered, like, what are we doing? Am I supposed to be thinking about anything else? And every time I had that question, Jesus just answered, "Walk with me." So I was like, okay, all right, I can do that. And nobody even noticed us as we were walking. And like, certainly nobody noticed that there was Jesus right there. And after we'd been walking together for a while, we started to reach the other end of the town. Like up ahead, I could see that the houses and the businesses lining the road had stopped, even though the road continued. And one of the last storefronts was just, maybe it was like a house with a Dutch door even. An older woman noticed us both, and she offered us some water, which I was so grateful for, because the stuff we were carrying was like just so heavy, so awkward. And so we put it down. I'm like, yes, please, thank you. And we're so hot and thirsty, and she was super sweet. Just like one of those grandmother women that I love and I'm grateful for. Just so grateful for. So we pick up our stuff, we thank her, and we start walking again. And now we had reached the end of the buildings, and I could see that the dirt road continued ahead, and it curved slightly to the right, and there was a really large ranch-style gate entrance to the town that we were already in. And, wide road, it was all dirt road, and it led out. And on our left, I could see that there was a large meadow, and the meadow went to the base of a hill that was sparsely covered with trees. And the meadow was so beautiful, and I was really drawn to it. But before I could turn toward it, I noticed a man coming up the dirt road from the entrance, and his face was red, and he was very angry, and he was like, "You're trying to leave. I know you're trying to leave. You're trying to leave." And I was like, I don't understand why this man is so angry. And I'm not trying to leave. But he was like, "I see where you're going. Just go. Just get out. Just get out. Just go. I can see you're trying to leave. Just go." And I was like, I'm just going to go walk in this meadow over here. And he's like, "You're lying. I see where you're going." And he's just on and on. And like the whole time, Jesus is standing right there next to me, witnessing this. And I just feel like, to this angry man, I just feel like, leave me alone. Like Jesus said, walk with me, and I'm walking with him. It's not, you don't have to worry about it. But this man's getting more and more upset. He doesn't even notice Jesus. And we just walk away into the meadow, and his shouts, like we keep walking. And he's just on that path, on that dirt road. And his shouts become quieter until he feels like he's chased me off. And then he turns and goes into the town. And as we were walking through the meadow, I became aware that that spirit he had of contention, he's brought it into the town. And I can kind of perceive that the entire town's beginning to take sides, right? Just one side against another. And around this time, Jesus and I reached the edge of the meadow that comes up against the bottom of that foothill. And I can see that there's a rustic, like 2-beam wooden fence with a small gate along, at the edge of this meadow before you go up this hill. And Jesus takes off the latch, and we go through, and out from behind one of the trees steps our mother, the one in whose image all women are made. And I was so happy to see her, and she was happy to see me. And she picked up the other end of the construction materials that Jesus and I had been carrying together. And instantly, all the weight and the awkwardness was just lifted. And we started hiking up the trail. We were in a single file. It was kind of like switchbacks going up the trail. And Jesus was carrying the front load, and my mother was carrying the back load, and I was in the middle. Like, you guys realize I'm not actually doing any of the work here, right? And they knew, and that was actually the point. And as we went up, I could see the town, but I realized because of the trees that people couldn't see us. They couldn't see that there was a trail there or anything. And with the higher perspective, I could see that dirt road coming out of the ranch style entrance to the town that we'd walk through connected to other towns with similar entrances. And they all seemed like they had a layout like ours, which is kind of two sides, one road going through it. And they all also had a meadow that connected to the foothill that we were on with a gate. Like they could all access the same place. And a lot of the towns were sort of I perceived that a lot of the towns were in various stages of what I saw with the two sides pitted against each other. And when we reached the top, I looked down into the valley below, and this is the other side of the valley, right? So we reached the top, and behind me, there's where I've come from, and down is where we're going. And so as I look down into the valley where we're going, I can see there's lots of people there building. And I knew that they were building Zion. And as soon as I saw it, I kind of started getting out. I started overthinking, and I was like, I don't know how to build. I've never successfully built something in my life. Like, I don't know anything about construction. And I just started thinking too much about how I didn't know how to do construction, and I kind of came out of the meditative state. And I felt like the Spirit was sort of like, all right, you're getting back in your human thought pattern, so that's it for now. I've been turning it about in my mind for these last few months, just trying to understand how much God wants me to speak and speak up, because I don't want to contribute to putting us in a state of contention. And also, if members of our church don't know whether polygamy is part of Zion because they've never heard a valid explanation for it that doesn't destroy their faith in God and the restoration, I want to make sure they know what their choice is. To me, it's really clear that there are some principles that cannot be used to build Zion because they yield destruction. And God has helped me see that polygamy is one of those. Other than child sacrifice, polygamy calls down cursings and destruction more quickly and thoroughly than any other principle. I believe Zion is a place of peaceful and energetic building. I'm so grateful that Karen Hyatt's physical body is fine, and I believe that she is in alignment with God and is spiritually fine too. But if you're someone who's calling for the spiritual execution or banishment of people who speak up and speak out with ideas that you disagree with, you're animated by a completely different spirit than Christ. If you believe someone is antichrist, then you preach what Christ is. You build up Christ. If you believe someone is wrong about history, then be ready to engage with the historical sources and try to find explanations for the points that people make rather than warding others away from them and telling people to be afraid of the consequences of a different historical narrative. Another short experience I want to tell you about changed my perspective of how important it is to just be willing to learn, and how much grace and mercy God has for us as we learn through error, and how as we learn through the errors of others. Several years ago, one of my children was sick and needed some medicine, antibiotics from the pharmacy. And so I went to the hospital, and there was a super long line. And anyway, I got in the wrong line. And so I ended up waiting 30 minutes for nothing. And so when it was time for me to pick up the medicine, I was like, you know what? If this were just me, I would just wait in the long line again. But I was like, I need to get this medicine home for my child. And so I thought to myself, I'll just wait in the line that I should have waited on in the first place. And then I'll have, in total the same amount of time. I won't wait in the pickup line 30 minutes 2 times. I'll just wait in the drop-off line and explain it to them. Well, before I did it, I asked a security guard, or I mentioned it to a security guard, and she was like, you can't do that. And she told me all about her thoughts. And I was like, okay, thanks for letting me know. And then I quietly tried to do it. And the pharmacist, everybody was fine, but the security guard saw me. And she was not happy. And it turned into a whole thing. And it race got involved because I was like an entitled white woman, and I was like, no, I'm just trying to get the medicine and my child needs it an hour ago. And it was so bad. And it happened on a Saturday, and the next day I was at church. I was taking the sacrament, and I was just praying about it because it is the worst. I hate interactions like that, where there's tons of contention and it's like, for what, it's just awful. And so I was praying about it, and I was trying to make things right with God. And I'm like, do I need to apologize to her? I'm trying to figure out, what am I asking for forgiveness for, right? So I'm trying to navigate it in prayer. And I'm sitting there I'm not feeling right about asking forgiveness for myself, because I really thought through it. I went through the ethics of it. And I'm like, what if everyone in the world did it this way? And I was like, yeah, it'd be fine, because everyone would still wait one time in the right line, just in the wrong order. And anyway, it didn't feel right that I was asking for forgiveness. So I was like, okay, help me forgive her. And even still, it didn't feel like the right thing. It wasn't that I shouldn't forgive her. It was just that's not what I was supposed to be praying about and for. So I thought through it, and then I just sort of sat there and I went through the whole exchange again in my mind and kind of thought out a few different options. And then I thought of an option that would have made a lot more sense. If this ever happens again, don't ask the security guard, right? Don't ask if you're going to do it anyway. And as I thought of that solution, I just, within my prayer, I said, I've learned. And when I said that in my prayer, I've learned. And I had learned, I got it inside, okay, if you don't want this sort of thing to happen, do it differently. And here's how you can do it. I thought of how to do it differently. As I said that in my prayer, it was like something cracked over my head, and I felt heat, and it wasn't heat, it was like a substance, it was like hot oil poured down, started at my forehead and just poured over my whole head, all the way down the front and back, ears, everything, down my neck, over my shoulders. And it was very surreal to me. And then I also started thinking, is this a baptism of fire and the Holy Ghost? Is that what's going on here? And then I kind of went away because I started thinking so much about it. But it was surreal to me that God was so happy that I'd learned. And I didn't have this sense that God was condemning her or me. And it was just like, you know what? You don't want those experiences, learn from it and move on. And that has been really influential for me as I've studied out polygamy and all sorts of different issues that we struggle with here, is that God's most anxious for us to learn and wants us to love each other. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share today, and I hope it can be useful to some or all, few of you. Man, I'll see you again soon.